Thank you all for joining us for our SICSS-Howard Mathematica Roundtable entitled Personal Experiences of African Americans in the Academy. I am joined today by a host of incredible faculty who will be in the good hands of our exceptional moderator, Esene. I'm not going to introduce our panelists. I'm just going to hand it over to Esene and she's going to take it away.
Thank you so much. So I'm Esene, and I am a current PhD student at UC Berkeley. And so I'll be introducing our panelists. I'm joined today by Dr. LaTanya Brown-Robertson, Dr. Denise N. Cook, Dr. Chasya Hiebert Hoagland, and Dr. Christine McWhorter. And so I'll start by introducing our panelists. LaTanya Brown-Robertson is the director of the honors program in the College of Arts and Science, professor of economics and Northeastern regional head for the NSF Includes Cohort 4 National Data Science Alliance. She holds a bachelor's degree, master's degree, and PhD in economics from Howard University. She returns to Howard after garnering over 17 years of experience as a professor of economics and an academic administrator. Dr. Brown-Robertson joins us from Bowie State University, where she was the special assistant for research and development and professor of economics in the College of Business. In this role, Dr. Brown-Robertson was responsible for increasing the university's grant funding by $16 million, transforming the College of Business curriculum plan, and ushering in the university's first data analytics program and certificate. She led multiple grants from organizations such as the National Science Foundation, the National Institute of Health, Carnegie Foundation, and the National Bureau of Economic Research. Dr. Brown-Robertson also served as interim chair of the Accounting, Finance, and Economics Department at Bowie State University. As chair, she developed and executed a development strategic plan, which involved forming a concentration in data analytics and implementing the University System of Maryland's badging micro-credential program. From 2012 to 2019, Dr. Brown-Robertson served as the director of the Undergraduate Learning Assistant Program, which is a university-wide program that places upper-level students as peer mentors for students in lower-level courses for course credit. And she holds various publications from peer-reviewed journals, including the American Economic Review, Eastern Economics Association Journal, Review of the Black Political Economy, and Journal of Community Development Society. And now Dr. Denise Cook. Denise Cook is a senior statistician who has been with the GOA in Washington, D.C. since 2001. She received her BA from California State University, Sacramento, earning the distinction of summa cum laude, and both her MA and PhD from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. All of her degrees are in sociology, where she focused on studies in quantitative research. In addition to her degree, Dr. Cook has certificates in nonprofit management, public management, social science methods, research, and teaching from UNLV. She also possesses a professional in human resources certification from the Human Resources Certification Institute. Her dissertation was an exploration of the intersection of volunteerism, work, leisure, utilizing the current population survey administered by the U.S. Census Bureau. Findings were examined via a multidisciplinary lens using research from economics, human resources, public administration, psychology, and sociology. Denise's current research interests are varied, but include questions which challenge social and economic assumptions. Dr. Cook owned a business prior to working for the federal government and has taught a number of courses, including statistics, during her career. With the federal government, she worked with DHS, FEMA, U.S. Census Bureau, and AmeriCorps. Formerly the Corporation of National and Community Service, CNCS. Denise has a passion for volunteerism and has served on several nonprofit advisory and community boards over the years. So thank you, Denise. Chasya Hiebert is a senior researcher with the Washington State Institute for Public Policy, WSIPP. WSIPP works at the behest of Washington legislature, with most of its research agenda determined by legislative assignment. Her position has given her the opportunity to work on a variety of projects, such as meta-analyses, cost-benefit analyses, and program evaluation. Her current research centers on education program analysis and evaluation. She holds a PhD in economics from the University of Washington and a BS in economics from the George Washington University. And lastly, we'll introduce Dr. Christine McWhorter. Dr. Christine McWhorter is an award-winning professor, scholar, researcher, educator, and public speaker, specializing in critical race media literacy, media effects, and news literacy. She's an assistant professor of broadcast journalism at Howard University. Prior to coming to Howard, she was an assistant professor at Norfolk State University. Through her inspirational instructional style, she emphasizes the importance of storytelling through students' unique perspective in terms of culture, life experiences, and goals in order for them to create meaningful work. Dr. McWhorter is a prolific storyteller who writes, shoots, and edits for video platforms. For nearly a decade, Dr. Christine McWhorter was a national television producer. She traveled the country and interviewed people about significant inspirational events in their lives. Thank you all for joining us here. You all have amazing trajectories and career paths. And so we're really excited to have you all here today to speak to us about your experience. And so I'm going to start with the first question, which I think is going to be geared more towards the professors in the room, but we'll broaden it out to speaking towards everybody's kind of career path and people in industry. But what steps did you all take to prepare for your career in academia?
Okay, I guess I'll go first. Well, okay, so I would say I was reflecting on this and so forth, and I was thinking about while I was in graduate school, I was a teaching assistant. I actually went to Howard University as well for graduate school. And at Howard, for the graduate students, I'm not sure if they do with the other universities, but they have a really great pedagogy training program for teaching assistants. And that program was extremely helpful in helping me to understand my path. And then once I graduated from Howard, I worked in the federal government as well as in the Washington, D.C., in the District of Columbia government. And then I was at Belmont University, which as a visiting professor. And then I spent 17 years after that at Bowie State University, which is a teaching university. So at a teaching university, we were required to have so many pedagogy hours. And so that really helped as well to prepare me as I moved up the ranks to assistant professor and associate professor and a full professor. I also was tapped during the beginning phases at Bowie State to go to national and regional events where I would intake information and then come back and be the facilitator for programs at the university. So I feel like all of those experiences that I did with the University System of Maryland, as well as on the national scale, and having to come back and share my knowledge at a teaching university has helped prepare me for a career in academia. And it never ends. It's always a cycle. It never ends. So that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, I'd agree with Dr. Brown-Robertson. I was in industry first, actually. I was a journalist, so becoming a professor wasn't really on my mind at that time. But when I did decide I wanted to become a professor, I started seeking out opportunities. I started working on my doctorate, like full-time at night. I, found some classes to teach at the community college, and then shortly after that, the 4-year colleges that were around me. So I really do like how she'd emphasized working on the pedagogy and trying to find opportunities to do that where they are available, because it really is no other way to do it but to do it. So I'd agree with her answer.
Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing. And I guess for Dr. Cook and Dr. Hiebert, how did you all make the decision to go into industry over a career in academia?
As a graduate student, you do take on courses, you teach, you provide, in your assistantship, you may support education or educators, and you actually may conduct research. And I really found that I loved the research aspect, and I really wanted to do that. Teaching was okay for me, but it wasn't really my passion. If I'm being completely frank, the money was a little bit better outside of academia than it was within academia. And so ultimately I did end up going into government because of, the money and the job security, plus the variety of work that was available.
For me, I never actually wanted to go into academia. Like when I applied to my program, I was interested in policy work. But I found that when I was working in internships in undergrad, a lot of the people that I was most inspired by were people who had PhDs in public policy spaces. And so they told me that if I wanted to pursue what I wanted to do, that it would until that I had an advanced degree in a PhD. And so it seemed like it'd be better to kind of go and focus on it than to work in industry and then come back. So that's why I chose the path that I did. But I always wanted to be in a policy space. The money was also helpful, so I definitely hear that. But I think that it's just there's so many different things that you can do with a PhD, and so all of them are very interesting. So you can follow what most interests you.
No, that's awesome. And I'm curious to hear, like, given each of your experiences in these different spaces, like, how does your day-to-day activity look like? Like, what is the day-to-day of, Black women academics in academia or in industry, and also in industry? Like, how does that look like for each of you all?
I can start first. I would say my day-to-day and my life overall on average from all of my experiences, I think it's been rewarding. It has been, I have been in spaces where I felt like as a Black woman, I was not utilized in certain capacities and spaces. And so when I felt like that, by me being in academia, you can have this entrepreneurial sense because a lot of times you're on a 9-month contract. So you have these 3 months and you can carve out and do grants and to buy out your time and so forth. And I believe I have this untapped entrepreneurial side to me. And so that helps me kind of play into that space where I felt like if I wasn't utilized in the direction of the trajectory of the goals of that institution, I carved out my own spaces through grants and consulting and research development, professional networks, even outside of the institution. And that's where I kind of found myself into the whole realm of being an economist, but doing a lot of data science and analytics, which I found a new passion for. So.
Yeah, I'll definitely say that my day-to-day really does vary. So I am fortunate to be in a position where I I identify the work that I want to work on, the research topics that are of interest to me as a statistician. Be great model to work with, and basically I create my schedule. I mean, I do the work as I want to do the work, and I work with congressional requests for information. So it's a varied schedule. It's quite interesting in that day to day it shifts. The work is interesting. I work on the same research for about a year and a half, maybe 2 years, and then I can switch topics. So it's a really varied and dynamic work day for me, day to day.
For me, I'm in a little bit of a different place. I'm on the front side of tenure. I'm not tenured yet, still tenure track. So I'll be completely honest with you guys. I call my days the struggle of the juggle, because I have my classes that I have to teach, which finally, it's been about 3 years for me now at Howard, and I'm teaching the same thing. So now I'm in a rhythm. So that's good. So I have the classes that I teach, and I'm always trying to find time to write. And also, I wanted to make sure to be candid about this because I don't know if anybody is in the same place, but I have a family, which I always wanted. And I got advice way earlier on that was like, don't do that because you won't be able to juggle, or it's going to keep you from your goals, or I was like, I'm not listening to you. So I do have a family, but what that does mean is I have to be very specific about how I order my day. If everybody's going to eat, if we're going to spend some kind of time together, but if I'm also, going to make tenure in 3 years, y'all pray for me. I hope I do. So it's a matter of, for me, getting the rhythm of my classes so that I have that kind of goes on. I feel bad for saying this. Don't take this exactly the way I see it, but I'm at a point where I can almost autopilot, not because I don't care about the stuff, just because I know the stuff. I know what I'm going to say. So I have that. I try to carve out a little writing time, and then the evenings I keep for them. So I say this to say, if somebody gave you that bad advice, don't listen. If you want it, you can do it.
I guess as far as my day-to-day, so WSIP is unusual in that we get our assignments from the legislature, so we don't have the same level of, we don't have a lot of choice in research that we do. We are asked the question, then we answer that question. So a lot of the time that I spend day-to-day is just working with stakeholders to kind of figure out, like, well, sometimes the questions don't lend themselves to the research methods that we have. And so it's kind of like figuring out, like, well, how do we do this with what we have access to? So it's a lot of discussions with external stakeholders, a lot of research writing. I think so. I don't think that it has and there's still, like, even in if you go into non-academia, there's still like a bit of a juggle, just making sure that you are working to finish your work and also make sure that you are making connections. That was one of the things that I was surprised. I thought that when I was in like a non-academic, I would basically like get the assignment, I would do the assignment, and that would be, but you really have to make sure that you're networking and that you're reaching out to people and getting to know other agencies and people in those agencies, because you can't just, you have to always like work on networking or you'll kind of stagnate.
Yeah, no, thank you all for sharing your day-to-day. That's super interesting. It seems like there's a lot of commonalities, but also like differences. And so it's like interesting to hear you all kind of lay it out like that for us. I was also curious if there were things that you all were looking for when you went on the job market, both in academia and industry. Like, were there things about your institutions that you ended up with that like compelled you to go there that you thought would be helpful for you as Black people navigating this space, like things that you maybe in hindsight now would tell your past you to look out for going into these spaces? Maybe we'll start with Dr. McWhorter.
Sure. I was reaching for the mute button. When I was a journalist, I saw it opened my eyes to a lot of things about the world in terms of inequity, in terms of systems, in terms of horrible things that were happening. And so I was at Norfolk State before I came to Howard, and that was my first HBCU experience, which was so fantastic because I was like, okay, we have a common goal. But Howard for me was, if I could borrow from Hamilton, it's the room where it happens, right? Like, I wanted to be in a place that was situated to make a real difference in the world. And so I'm grateful to be here. No place is perfect, but Howard is wonderful because I feel like I am situated in a place where I can make a real difference. And so I think in terms of what you're looking for and where you end up, I think you really have to understand like what your values are, what you want to do, what you want to leave this earth looking like when you leave. And Howard is a place for me where I feel like I can accomplish those things.
As someone else who works at Howard, I would totally agree that serious sacred land there, and you can really feel it there. And I agree. You have to kind of go along with what your calling is and what the issues that you want to pursue and so forth. So for me, I realized that my calling in my space was around places where I dealt with issues and avenues for economic empowerment, and particularly for the Black community. I remember a couple of years ago, I had got a job offer at a majority white institution, and I was excited about it, and I was really contemplating it. But one question that was posed in my head was, how is where's my calling, and how am I going to tap into the minority students and the Black students there to make sure that they feel empowered, when I was thinking about going to that institution as well. So I realized that getting into the job market and thinking about where I want to be, I have to be in a place where I feel like I'm creating that sense of economic empowerment, in particular for the Black community.
For me, it was really looking at, I wanted to do something that had an impact, that I felt had purpose. And, you know, with government, you're going to find a wide variety of agencies and different kinds of work that you can do. But for me, I really wanted to do something that wasn't, you know, just kind of you push a button, you log in, you push a button, you log out. You know, that to me didn't seem like something that would be fulfilling. And so the agency that I work with now, we examine all agencies in the government. We even look at what's happening in other countries as it relates to the US economy, as it relates to laws here in the United States. And for me, that level of impact needed to be present in the kind of work that I was doing for me to feel like it was something worth my time, you know, all of the money I spent on my education. And another thing is, you know, in government, when you go work in an agency, you may not know what the demographics look like in the office. And, you know, in my agency, unfortunately, I was the first woman of color, Black woman who was hired as a statistician right. And so for me, that was something that made me realize, okay, how can I affect the institution in that, you know, we become a little more diverse. And so I sit on hiring panels now. I you know, look through resumes now. And I really look for opportunities to bring in, you know, minorities where I can of any race, and, you know, to get in there and get an opportunity to showcase their abilities. Because at times, you know, sometimes there are, you know, some biases that people may have that they don't recognize. But as a woman of color, I'm taking my position of power, and I'm really attempting to, you know, assist those behind me. What I do is, it has to have a purpose, but also my position in the organization, how do I bring that purpose to enhance the opportunities for those behind me?
I'm just going to echo everything that Dr. Brooks said. I also, the reason why I wanted to work where I was because I really like the fact that we don't get to choose what the research that we do, but it's asked for. And so like we can really see like how they are implement, like the people who are engaging with our work are trying to figure out how to do policies better. And so some people, like for some of the work that WSIP does, they've actually like chosen to fund programs or not fund programs based on what we've said. So there's a lot of power and responsibility in that. But at the same time, there have been many times where I've been the only person in the room, like Black person in the room. It's not necessarily a very diverse space. And I think that like one of the things that I've had to learn is like how to balance that, because at one point it was like really overwhelming where I'm like, I have to be the voice because there's no one like it has to be me. And I think that learned that you have to have like a balance where like sometimes I can be Chasya in that space. And sometimes I can be that voice and just trying to like make sure that I'm not putting too much pressure on myself, but also like thinking about it in the right way so that it's empowering and not like overwhelming.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for all of you for sharing your experience. I think a lot of us in the room can relate to that. I know I can relate to that. So yeah, really appreciate hearing your perspective. And I also wanted to mention for the two Howard alum professors in the room, my younger brother actually goes to Howard, so that's fun. Yeah. Well, I don't know what he's going to major in, but I'll let you know. But so I have two more questions. So for participants in the audience, get your questions ready for these amazing panelists. So I guess my next question, my next two questions are going to be focused around like your time as PhD students and like kind of the challenges you face there. So what were some, I just curious about your thoughts around imposter syndrome, and like when you experienced it, like what were things that kind of made a difference for you in terms of like moving beyond that and kind of getting to the finish line of your PhD, getting to where you are now?
I guess I'll go first. I didn't realize I was dealing with imposter syndrome until after reflecting on it. And I was like, oh, so that's what that was, imposter syndrome. And so after reflecting on it in different situations and so forth, the way I tried to counter such feelings was I prepared like crazy. I definitely prepared. You know, I always wanted to make myself feel like I knew more than most people in the room about whatever I was talking about. My faith helps a lot. So me understanding my purpose and my calling, and me channeling that, and me feel like I'm moving in there and believing in myself, that I'm on the correct path and the correct calling, helps to overcome any other doubts and so forth that I would have. But it's definitely a centering process and everything, especially when you go in and you do something you haven't done before. Like, I'm a director of an honors program. You know, and when I became the director of the honors program, I was like, okay, so what do I do? And they was like, well, I don't know, you gotta find out, right? And so it was this intimidation sense at first, but moving into it, I was like, I know I'm placed here for a reason. I'm going to walk within this path, and I'm going to believe in myself and my ability to be able to innovate and create.
I want to share an experience that relates to that. When at Howard, for new faculty, the associate provost has these like training, little short training classes you can go to, like an hour on Thursdays, and every time there's like a different topic. And one of the topics was imposter syndrome. And so I had learned about it in grad school, and how I was taught in grad school, the emphasis was it's imposter syndrome because everybody's feeling the same way. Like, everyone feels like they're a fraud. Everybody feels like everyone else knows more than them. But in this particular workshop, the emphasis was changed, and I appreciate it so much. It was what Dr. Brown-Robertson said. It was, you're supposed to be here. You belong here. Like, it wasn't focused on what everybody else is doing, like, at all. Like, maybe they feel like a fraud, maybe they don't, doesn't matter. You are where you're supposed to be. And I find that when I remind myself of that, the imposter syndrome dissipates, because a lot of times too, I think in our minds, we find evidence for the imposter syndrome. I'm not supposed to be here because I haven't finished writing my book, or because I haven't, done this and that, yada, yada. Doesn't matter. You're where you're supposed to be, and you'll get where you need to go. Like, I feel like that is something that keeps me grounded, especially here, because everybody is so illustrious at HU. So if I can keep my mind on that, that really does help.
Yeah, I'll definitely say as a graduate student and as a professional, I mean, I'm old now and I work in the government and have for years, and I still get bouts of imposter syndrome. One thing that I learned after graduate school, I wish I learned it during graduate school, was that, you know, everyone comes into a PhD program fearful of what they don't know. There are going to be people in the program that pretend to know everything, right? They read a book one time and that's the only vocab word. You'll notice the people in your program. They say that one big word every opportunity they can, because that's, you know, the new word of the day of the article or the book they read. But that's the extent of their knowledge. But it is very important for you to realize a couple of things. One, you are not in competition with anyone else in your doctoral. So if they pass or fail their classes, guess what? That has nothing to do with you, okay? In my doctoral program, the two brightest students that did so well, A's in all their classes, they never finished. I did not get A's in all of my classes. I wasn't the brightest. I will be the first to admit that. However, I did graduate first because I had that drive within myself and I refuse to give up. Okay, so that's one thing to keep in mind when it comes to imposter syndrome as a graduate student. Another thing to keep in mind is that no matter where you go, you are never going to be the person that knows everything. Why? Because that person doesn't exist. So you need to understand that it is okay to not know something. And if other people know that something that you don't know, learn it. That's it. It's okay for you to say, I am not sure. I have no idea what this is, but I will research it and get back to you. That is always an okay thing to say. And, you know, don't be hard on yourself. That's a big thing. People, you know, get into a space where they're like, oh man, I should know this and I should have, you know, all of this knowledge. Everyone else in class seems to understand it and get it. Guess what? That's what tutors are for. If you need a tutor, get one. Talk to your teacher. Use office hours. Read more than you have to if you have the capacity to do so. You know, as Dr. Brown-Robertson said, you know, read up on topics. Know as much as you can, but if you don't know everything, that's fine too. Don't be hard on yourself, because where I am now in my career, one of the most refreshing things ever said to me by my boss was, you know what, Denise, I don't know that. And it's something, you know, that we would think, okay, everyone who's a statistician knows this, but guess what? It's impossible to know everything. So understanding your limits, it actually enhances your credibility, because if you're the type of person that likes to make things up because you don't know it, guess what? There goes your reputation and your credibility. So be honest with yourself, be honest with others, and you'll get pretty far in your career. And that'll help to diminish the imposter syndrome, because we all have it, we all get it, no matter how old, young, new, you know, whatever, in whatever space you're in, it exists. And people that you would never suspect have it, it's okay. It's a human thing to have.
I think that in my graduate school experience, I remember the exact moment I think that imposter syndrome hit, just because I was, for most of the time I was in my PhD program, I was the only Black woman in the department, like just me. And so I think I was looking, someone like pointed out this NSF fact about the number of, they pointed out the number of Black economists that had graduated that year. And I was shocked because like the number that the NSF had was literally the people, the number of people in the department, I think at the time. So I was like, oh gosh, you know, like I was just like, I don't belong here. There's no one like me here. And I kind of like had to take a minute to really kind of like settle with that. But I think that one of the things that I heard, like one of my friends was saying, is that it's kind of like, we're like a unicorn almost, because like you know, like you're and you're unique and you have this it's isn't necessarily going to be coming from other places. And so I think that like rather than being like, oh gosh, you know, I'm the only one, like taking that and like turning it around and break to think of how I think is important. And I think that like just as far as imposter syndrome, the other thing that I saw, just to echo what Dr. Cook said, is that like everyone like feels that. And I think that like I didn't really understand like how like in that department, everyone, so many people felt that they were not quite where they wanted to be, or that someone would know that they didn't know something. And so it's not like everyone feels that. And so there's so many like aspects to who you are as a researcher that brought you into this field. And so just like rely on that, because like if you weren't supposed to be there, you would not be there. So like just recognize that everyone else is feeling it, and then just like kind of like use that as a way to like make connections and like find people who will like support what you want to do. So I don't know, I feel like I always wait till the end, and then like everyone else in the panel says so many like brilliant things, and so I just like don't know what everyone else has said.
Yeah, no, thank you all for sharing. And yeah, again, I can relate to a lot of what you all said. I also like had an experience with a professor who, you know, was just really open about what he didn't know, like my advisor actually. And that was super refreshing. And like, it allowed me to like be vulnerable as well with what I don't know. And then I just like learned a lot more from him after that. So yeah, I really appreciate all the experiences you all have shared. And we'll start by taking a question from one of our participants. So Nina, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you very much. And thank you to all the panelists. Happy to hear from everyone. Good, whatever time zone you're in. Hello. Hope you enjoy your day. So my question is, how did you, assuming you did, how did you sustain, you know, fun, that part of yourself that's excited and happy during your PhD programs? How did you fuel that energy and replenish yourself and enjoy away from academia, away from the department, away from, assuming all that bits was not also fun, you know, how else did you maintain that aspect of your life?
I'm going to keep it completely honest, just so that I can be a cautionary tale. I did not. I literally said, and it took me 6 years to get mine because of life circumstances. And I took the mindset that I'm going to focus on this and make sure I get it done. And I was working all the time and writing all the time. And I missed like milestones in like my friends and family's lives. They still laugh about it now, like that during that time, you know, nope, Christine can't come. Like they wouldn't even ask. They'd be like, no, she's writing, she's working, she's, you know, and now on the other side of it, it's something that I'm learning. And also like, no matter what point of life you're in, you're going to have to learn how to balance it, and you're going to have to learn how to refresh yourself and replenish. So I tell you that to say, don't be like me. Don't think, you know, I just get through it, and when I get on the other side, I'll be able to rest. You will not. You have to learn how to do it now. You got to learn now. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll definitely say I was in my doctoral program. I was married, had 3 kids. You know, other students would go hang out, have a good time, and I was at home with the kids. But one thing that I did learn that was really important to maintain that balance, to you know, maintain everything, was counseling. I actually went to counseling. I had a counselor that I met with on a regular basis, you know, that I was able to bounce things off of, things that I was going through. And, you know, per the suggestion of the counselor, I would take breaks, you know, take time and, you know, go take a road trip somewhere, or spend a weekend somewhere, just disconnect from everything, turn off the computer, and just have an opportunity to breathe. And so finding that balance was really important for me. Was counseling fun? Not really, but it helped me to recognize that I needed to do more things in life to maintain that fun. So it was something well worth it, that I think that if you're a doctoral student, actually anyone on this earth should be in counseling at least once in their life, for just even if it's just a checkup, even if you don't feel like there's anything wrong. So, find that balance how you can.
I just want to piggyback on what Dr. Cook said. I totally agree. Counseling definitely helps. I remember one thing that my counselor told me. At first, I was going to tell you what my professor told me, who said, "Work hard, play hard," right? But I think that I like the advice my counselor gave me. She said to me, every day, ask yourself, do an assessment, and say, "What did I do for myself today?" And write it down. And I still do that to this day. And believe me, I look forward to asking myself that question.
Did not have, I think I probably had the same experience with Dr. McWhorter, where I just did not have, like, I just worked and worked and worked. But I think that when I did socialize, I think I tried to be friends with the other students in my program, so that way we were all going through it together. So I think that, like, when we would have breaks, it's like, oh, you would understand that it's like, oh yeah, it's like the 30 minutes that we could break before you have to write. So like, I think that was helpful because they understood like where I was coming from and like what we were all going through the same thing. So just like building those connections with your department, I think is important.
Great, thank you. And next we have a question from Joelle. Yeah, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, everyone. First, thank you for this panel. I think there's been a lot of amazing wisdom that we've gotten today. I guess my question is related to the topic of being the first in a lot of spaces. I struggle with this being an illegalized immigrant. And particularly when you're the first in these spaces, the question of the pipeline comes up. How do you pull other people up into these spaces? And for me, the question is really about the ethics of it, right? Like sometimes these institutions are not able or willing or ready to take us in there. And so it becomes a question of like, should we pull other people up? And if we should, then how do we do it without kind of causing harm to our own people? Yeah.
I'm gonna let
That
somebody
is-
else take
oh.
the first step. No, go ahead, Dr. Cook. I was hoping you would go first.
Okay, so that's an amazing question. As the child of immigrants myself, I definitely can relate to that. So that when it comes to the ethics of doing so, one thing to really keep in mind when you're examining, whether it's, on a hiring panel or you're working with students or whatever the case may be, your goal isn't to look for the name that is, that strikes you as, something that may not be a standard, American name, right? The goal is really to look at the highest quality candidates, regardless of their name, right? So it's eliminating the bias that may exist with other people. It's really looking at those qualifications, where not saying that in my agency, people were saying, oh, here's a name we can't pronounce, we're not going to interview this person. But for me, the name did not matter, right? So I'm looking for the skill set. And I found in my background, I will kind of also share this, is human resources. So I do have a little more insight when it comes to hiring. But, when you take aside certain things that may influence other people, I found that, okay, I'm pulling different groups of people than this other panelist who's reviewing names. What is it that's different? Oh, okay, so the education is about the same. Employment background is about the same. Oh, okay, my list has people whose names may be a little more difficult to pronounce, right? So it really is being conscientious of, how you're approaching looking for people to put on the short list that you want to call for interviews, and recognizing that, yeah, there may be some biases that people are aware of or not, but how do you balance that out? How can you be that voice to speak up and say, you know what, we have these people, this list is the same people that you have and I have, but I have these people on my list, and let me fight for them a little bit harder than other people may do so. Is it ethical? I believe so, because again, we're trying to eliminate bias as opposed to introduce a specific bias. When it comes to academia now, we have, of course, unfortunately, the recent Supreme Court ruling that we no longer can look at affirmative action when it comes to college admissions. So what is that going to do? It's going to take people within the institutions to not look at the names again, but when it comes to similar qualifications, fight for those people that may otherwise be overlooked.
I wanted to add to that too, because I recall that you mentioned the ethics of bringing somebody into a space like when you know how it is. So I will share this with you guys. When I was a journalist, I worked at an organization that I did not agree with ideologically. It was a Christian organization, and I am a person of faith, not that kind, so it was different. Some stuff was the same, some was different. And so I had people who would come, friends, and say, oh, it must be the most wonderful place to work in the world. Can you put in a good word for me? Can you bring me on? And I think initially my first thought was, I would say, you really don't know the idiosyncrasies of the place. You really don't know the realities of working there and all of the microaggressions that I'm fighting every single day. So no, don't come. But here's what I had to realize, that there are some people who you can say, this is not for you. And some people want to go in there and make it better for the other people. Like, some people are ready for that fight. And so I think the best you can do is to be honest about the environment, honest about the good qualities and the negative qualities, be completely transparent and say, listen, if your mindset is, I'm going to go in here and change things, come on in. But if it's not going to be for you, then I just have to be real about what you're taking on. And so I think the honesty helps.
Thank you so much for your responses. Yeah, I think in the interest of time, we're going to move on to the next question. We have 2 questions left. So Beth, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Sure, thanks. And this may be a quick one if this doesn't apply to anybody in this context, but I'm curious if any of you all identify personally as introverts, and if that's had any impact on sort of the career choices you make, how you balance your energy, how you see yourself as a leader. So anything around sort of how you fit into workplaces, or how you navigate that or make decisions based on introversion or extroversion, anything like that. And if there's no one for whom that's relevant, I'm happy to go on to the next question from Rebecca. Thanks.
Huge introvert. That's why I keep going last. Like I'll hop in usually and kind of like, I think that being an introvert, the thing that I've had to balance with that is that a lot of times the systems aren't necessarily set up for introverts, because I think that like you have to in some ways like sell yourself and like kind of promote yourself. And so like if you're introverted, I think it's kind of like, well, it will like let my work kind of like speak for itself, and it's not going to. So I think that like if you are an introvert and you have to like figure out like how you can accomplish that same thing in a different way. So one of the things that I found is helpful is that instead of having like a lot of conversations, like big group conversations, I would try to have like more like tailored, like one-on-one conversations with people. And so it's just that, and because that is where I kind of shine, is like having like, because then you can get into more of the details, into the weeds. And so like that's just like where my head, like it works that way. And so I think that it's just you don't have to like fake being an extrovert because you'll just feel like uncomfortable and whatnot. Just try to figure out how you can still make connections and how you can still like build relationships while still being true to yourself. So there's a lot of ways to do that. But I think that just like making sure that you're still doing it, I think is the most important part.
Yeah, thanks so much. I'm also an introvert, so great advice. And I guess our last question, Rebecca, do you want to go ahead and unmute and ask?
Totally. Thanks, Desiree. Thank you guys so much for speaking to us and sharing your experiences. This has been like super, super useful. I have two questions, and so feel free to disregard or pick whichever. The first one is my experience working with undergrads. There's obviously like, sometimes characteristics of, undergrads that kind of like, for me, sort of like distinguish them, right? So it might just be like their hospital, like how hospitable they are to like learning, and kind of like how quick they are to like ask questions, follow up in office hours and things like that. I'm curious, for those of you who like work with graduate students, if you can like say something about maybe some of the characteristics that you see of students that may be successful in the traditional sense, but also just maybe navigating the space well, and that kind of like stand out to you in that way. And the second one is kind of in relation to, this is something that I hear a lot from my faculty mentors of color at PWIs, which is just like this sort of like this kind of intense, sometimes burden it can feel it's kind of like placed on faculty of color, specifically when it comes to like diversity and inclusion initiatives and things like that, such that like it, many people end up taking on just way more extra things that then their sort of like white colleagues have to. And so I'm curious, but also like, trying to maintain the conviction that you would like to see these spaces diversified. So I would be curious to hear kind of the way you guys have chosen to navigate and prioritize your time when it comes to these types of like initiatives. If you have any like suggestions for us as we're entering into these spaces, how to be vigilant. So thank you guys.
I think those are great questions. I think I'm gonna try to tackle your last question. Coming from even I've been at HBCUs, but the faculty are very diverse. Okay, and I'm also a woman, and so coming from those spaces, I have felt a little bit of tension about navigating those different spaces, and what are the things that I've done to kind of counter those. And one thing that I would say is that I just constantly believed in myself, believed in what I could kind of bring to the table and to the situation. I also found it challenging where I wanted to make sure that I was, even though I was going down a road less traveled by being a Black female economist, I wanted to make sure that I created new opportunities and new spaces for other people to see the passion and the love for this field and not be afraid of it or intimidated by it. And so I hope that helps to answer the question a little bit.
Okay, well, I guess we'll let James ask his question, and I guess panelists, if you want to respond to James and continue responding to Rebecca, feel free to go ahead and do so. But James, why don't you go ahead and ask your question?
Thank you very much. So LaTanya, I think you probably mentioned while speaking about the pedagogy course in grad school that really helped you later on. I'm just curious if it was just for the graduate students or only for TAs or just for people who were interested, or if it was open to everyone, because I do find that this is not something that's very common. And so there are a lot of people who are very good in their content area, but really struggle with pedagogy. And I'm really curious about how that experience shaped your trajectory. If you want to touch to that, or if any panel member wants to also add up to it. Thank you.
Okay, I'll just quickly tap on it. while that was at the institutions that I was at, as far as the pedagogy experiences, you can find things online, like the AACU, the American Association for Colleges and Universities. I go on their website all the time. The Chronicle for Higher Education, Educate, all of those different spaces. They have even had specific journals that deal with the pedagogy of your particular discipline. So in economics, they have teaching journals, economics of education journals, and so forth. So I find myself within those spaces, reading up on that information, as well as I'm a big interdisciplinary person. And so I find myself, hanging out with people who have PhDs in education and creating learning. I'm big on learning. I created a lot of faculty learning communities out of that space. So if you don't see it, again, carve it out. Carve out that space. Do the research and carve out your own space.
Yeah, thanks so much. Does anyone have any, I guess, remaining thoughts, comments on any of the questions that have been asked? So. Okay. Well, yeah, no, thank you all so much for your time, for your answers. Like, this has been a really great panel. Thank you, participants, for your questions. Really appreciate all of those as well. So yeah, just wanted to thank you again to Dr. Brown-Robertson, Dr. Cook, Dr. Hiebert, Dr. McWhorter. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you all for watching. I would also be remiss if I did not thank the three SICSS-Howard Mathematica site faculty sponsors who helped put this panel together. So that's Dr. Terry Adams, Dr. Nicole Jenkins, and Dr. Rebecca Hsu. We would also want to mention one of our faculty panel members who recently passed away. So rest in power, Dr. William Edwards Briggs. He was an American economist who was a professor of economics at Howard University, chief economist for the AFL-CIO, and assistant secretary of labor for policy in the Obama administration from 2009 to 2012.
Thank you all for watching. For more information on SICSS-Howard Mathematica, visit our website, follow us on social media, and join our email list.